File number 002. Topic: the border dilemma. Parties: the nation versus the migrant. A line drawn in sand, in water, in wire. On one side, those seeking refuge, opportunity, survival. On the other, those guarding sovereignty, security, order. Both invoke morality. Both claim necessity. The line remains, and so does the question, who decides who belongs? This is not a new conflict. It is as old as the concept of nation itself, but today it has reached a breaking point. The archive has recorded both testimonies. Neither will yield, neither can be ignored. The debate begins.
Let me start with a simple truth that somehow gets forgotten in all the noise. Borders are accidents of history, lines drawn by conquest, colonialism, treaties signed by men long dead who carved up the world to suit their empires. And now we treat them like sacred law, as if the soil on one side is fundamentally different from the soil on the other, as if a child born 10 meters north deserves safety, healthcare, opportunity, while a child born 10 meters south deserves nothing. But here's what's actually real. A mother fleeing cartel violence because she witnessed a murder and they know where she lives. A family escaping drought and famine because climate change destroyed 3 consecutive harvests. A child walking 1,000 miles because staying means conscription into a gang or death. These aren't economic tourists, these aren't invaders. They're human beings exercising the oldest right in human history. The right to move away from danger and towards safety. And we respond with walls, with cages, with tear gas fired at women and children. We criminalize desperation and call it law and order. We separate parents from children and call it deterrence. When did we become so afraid of each other that we forgot what it means to be human? When did give me your tired, your poor become show me your papers or face detention?
When did compassion become synonymous with chaos? You speak of history and poetry. Let me speak of mathematics and reality. Every nation has finite resources. Hospitals, schools, housing, jobs, social services. These systems are built for a specific population size, a specific tax base, a specific rate of integration. When millions arrive outside legal channels, those systems don't just buckle, they break. Emergency rooms become primary care clinics because migrants can't access regular doctors. Schools need translators for 20 different languages but don't have funding for textbooks. Housing markets explode because demand suddenly outstrips supply. And here's the part no one wants to say out loud. It's not the wealthy who bear this cost. It's not the politicians debating immigration in air-conditioned offices. It's working-class communities. You call them human beings exercising rights. I call it what it is, breaking the law. Illegal entry is called illegal for a reason, and when you reward it with catch and release, with eventual amnesty, with access to services, you incentivize more of it. You enrich human traffickers who charge $10,000 per person. You create chaos that overwhelms border communities, and you undermine the very concept of national sovereignty.
Breaking the law. You keep saying that like it's an argument. Let's talk about law specifically, international law. International law says people have the right to seek asylum, to flee persecution, violence, threats to their life. That's not charity, that's legally binding obligation. But we've weaponized bureaucracy. We've made the legal pathway so narrow, so slow, so impossibly complex that people have no choice but to cross illegally. Wait times of 5, 10, 15 years for a visa interview. Application fees of thousands of dollars that a farmer earning $2 a day can't possibly afford. Requirements to prove you won't stay illegally while living in a country where staying means death. And then we punish them for not using the system designed to exclude them. You want to talk about human trafficking? We created that market. When you make legal migration functionally impossible, you force desperate people into the hands of criminals. Those bodies in the desert, those children who drowned, that's not on the migrants. That's on a system that treats asylum seeking like a crime. You talk about finite resources. The US spent $25 billion on border enforcement last year. Imagine if we spent even half of that on processing asylum claims quickly, humanely, legally. Imagine if we partnered with source countries to address root causes, violence, corruption, climate change. But no, it's easier to militarize borders and call it security. Easier to build walls than build solutions.
Build solutions. Beautiful rhetoric. You know what's not rhetoric? The reality on the ground right now. El Paso, Texas. Population 680,000. In 1 year, they received 430,000 migrant encounters. That's more than half their entire population arriving in 12 months. Their schools added 5,000 students who don't speak English. Their hospitals are treating people for diseases we'd eradicated decades ago. Their law enforcement is spending 70% of their time on immigration-related calls instead of protecting citizens. And who suffers most from all this chaos? Legal immigrants. People who waited in line for years, who followed every rule, who invested tens of thousands of dollars doing it the right way. Now they watch others cut ahead, break the law, and get rewarded for it with work permits, driver's licenses, access to services. You want to destroy faith in the system. That's how you do it. You say international law obligates us to accept asylum seekers? Fine, but asylum has a definition. It's for people fleeing government persecution based on specific protected categories, not poverty, not gang violence, not climate change. Most people crossing the border don't qualify for asylum under actual legal standards, but they claim it anyway because they know the system is so backlogged they'll get years inside the U.S. before their case is heard. And by then, they've disappeared into the interior. That's not asylum. That's gaming the system.
Gaming the system? You keep framing desperate people as con artists. Let me tell you about gaming the system.
American businesses depend on undocumented labor. Agriculture, meat processing, construction, hospitality, domestic work. Entire industries built on the backs of people who can't complain about wages, safety, or abuse because deportation hangs over their heads.
You know why immigration reform never happens? Because powerful interests profit from the status quo. They want the labor but not the rights, the work but not the worker protections. So spare me the rule of law speech when the law is selectively enforced based on who benefits. We prosecute desperate families but turn a blind eye to corporations hiring undocumented workers by the thousands. And let's address your security argument. You know what the data actually shows? Immigrants, documented or undocumented, commit crimes at lower rates than native-born citizens. Undocumented immigrants have a conviction rate of 1.4% compared to 2.4% for native-born Americans. They're less likely to commit violent crime, property crime, or drug offenses. But you don't lead with data, you lead with fear. Fear of MS-13, fear of fentanyl, fear of caravans. Never mind that most fentanyl comes through legal ports of entry hidden in vehicles driven by US citizens. Fear of the other, fear of cultural change, fear disguised as policy, but rooted in something much older and uglier. And while you build higher walls, people keep dying. 3,000 bodies recovered at the southern US border in the last decade, thousands more in the Mediterranean, families dehydrating in deserts, children drowning in rivers. Every one of those deaths is a policy choice, a choice to prioritize enforcement over humanity.
Humanity. You keep using that word. Let me tell you about humanity. Many terrorists entered countries by exploiting immigration systems, by claiming asylum, by overstaying visas, by crossing borders illegally. When you don't control who enters, you don't know who enters. When you overwhelm border systems with mass migration, you create gaps that bad actors exploit. You cite crime statistics showing immigrants commit fewer crimes. Fine. But you're ignoring a selection bias. When you can't properly vet people, when you can't run background checks because they don't have documentation, when they're using false identities, how do you even compile accurate crime statistics? And let's talk about the economics you conveniently skip over. Undocumented immigrants pay some taxes. Sure, sales tax, some payroll tax under false SSNs, but they consume far more in services than they contribute. A single emergency room visit for childbirth, $10,000 paid by taxpayers. Educating one child, K-12, $150,000 on average, and they're not paying income tax, not paying full payroll tax, not funding the systems they use. Border states are spending billions they don't have. Texas spent $850 million on border security last year, money that could have gone to schools, infrastructure, healthcare for citizens. You mock the wall. You call it ineffective, cruel, a waste. But where walls were built, illegal crossings dropped 90%. Walls work, enforcement works, consequences work. What doesn't work is catch and release. Releasing migrants into the interior with a court date years away that 70% won't attend. That's not Humanity. That's abdication of duty.
Duty, sovereignty, national interest. You hide behind these words like they absolve you of moral responsibility. You know what history remembers? Not the nations that controlled their borders, the nations that turned away refugees who later died. We are living through one of the largest forced migration crises in human history. Climate change is making entire regions uninhabitable. Violence and corruption are making countries unlivable, and this will only accelerate. You can build all the walls you want, you can militarize every border, you can criminalize every crossing, but people will keep coming because the alternative is death. And when they do, you'll have a choice. Treat them like human beings or treat them like problems to be solved with violence. You cite economic costs. I cite moral bankruptcy. The richest nations in human history claiming they can't afford compassion. We can afford endless wars, tax cuts for billionaires, subsidies for corporations, but asylum processing, healthcare for children, suddenly the cupboard is bare. This isn't about resources, it's about priorities. And history will judge what we prioritized.
History will judge whether we preserved functioning societies. You speak of morality in the abstract. I speak of consequences in the concrete. Look at Europe. Germany accepted 1 million migrants in 2015. A humanitarian gesture, right? Now, integration has failed. Crime rates spiked in migrant-heavy areas. Parallel societies formed where host country laws are ignored. Women's rights, LGBTQ rights, freedom of speech, all threatened by imported values incompatible with Western democracy. Humanitarian polling shows native populations now opposing further migration by overwhelming margins. Far-right parties gaining power across Europe. Why? Because people feel their countries are being taken from them without their consent. And that matters. Democracy matters. Citizens have a right to decide who joins their national community. That's not racism. That's sovereignty. A nation is not just territory. It's a social contract. Shared language, shared values, shared history, shared investment in each other's welfare. When you add millions of people who don't share that contract, who haven't been selected through any process, who arrive en masse demanding accommodation, you fracture that bond. You mock concerns about cultural change. But go to areas of Minneapolis, Michigan, parts of California, places that have been transformed by mass migration. Ask longtime residents how they feel. Ask them if anyone consulted them before their neighborhoods changed beyond recognition. Their concerns are dismissed as bigotry, but they're not bigots. They're people who feel they've lost their home without ever moving. And when you dismiss those feelings, when you call them racist for wanting their country to remain recognizably their country, you push them toward actual extremists who will listen to them. You want to prevent the rise of authoritarianism? Don't lecture people about their moral failings. Listen to their legitimate concerns about pace, scale, and control of immigration.
Legitimate concerns, fine, then let's talk about legitimacy. Every single wave of immigration in history has been met with identical fears. They don't speak our language, they won't integrate, they'll change our culture, they'll bring crime. And every single time, within one generation, they do integrate. Their children speak English. Their grandchildren can't speak the old language. They become doctors, teachers, entrepreneurs, soldiers. They become American, Canadian, British, Australian. The legitimate concerns are just prejudice dressed in policy language, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise.
Then you're part of the problem. Because when you refuse to distinguish between controlled legal immigration with vetting and integration support versus mass, chaotic, illegal immigration with no vetting and overwhelmed systems, you guarantee backlash. I'm not anti-immigrant. I'm pro-order. I want immigration at a pace society can absorb. With security vetting we can trust. Through legal channels we can manage. With integration support that works. What I don't want is what we have now. Chaos masquerading as compassion. A system so broken that it serves no one. Not citizens, not legal immigrants, not even the migrants themselves who risk death crossing illegally. If you actually cared about migrants, you'd want a functioning, humane legal system. Instead, you enable a deadly black market run by cartels. That blood is on your hands, too.
File 002 concluded. One side argues from the heart, claims that borders are violence, that any nation wealthy enough to help has a moral duty to do so, that to turn away the desperate is to be complicit in their suffering. The other argues from the head, claims that borders are civilization, that any nation unable to control who enters will eventually cease to exist, that to accept everyone is to help no one. Both present data, both cite experts, both invoke justice. One sees cruelty in every deportation, the other sees collapse in unlimited acceptance. One believes in universal human rights transcending nationality. The other believes national communities have rights too, including the right to persist. History offers no clear answers. Societies that welcomed strangers thrived and collapsed. Societies that closed borders preserved themselves and stagnated. The archive records both outcomes. The line remains drawn, people keep crossing it, some welcome them, some turn them away, and the moral weight of both choices grows heavier each day. The evidence has been presented. No consensus was reached. Perhaps none ever will be. The decision is yours.